I heard Max give a talk on the exception clause, and it was a really brilliant talk, taught me many things that I didn't know as a historian, other state constitutions, where it begins. And in fact, it doesn't begin just with the 13th Amendment, but is embedded in state constitutions since the inception, which shows to what degree this has been built into the American system. And Max runs a radio program called Abolition Today and does a lot of public speaking. So thank you, Max, for coming. And again, I just want to encourage people just to do a raise hand function, because I'd like us to be in dialogue as we move along too. And other than that, I'm just going to stay quiet. Max?
Hello, I'm Max Parthas. I am, as you said, the host or co-host along with Yusuf Hassan of Abolition Today, which is available at abolitiontoday.org. We talk about all the different aspects of modern legalized slavery, which is allowed through the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And each program is focused on a different aspect of that so we can get a fully fleshed out understanding for people. And I'm also the acting director for the Paul Cuffey Abolitionist Center, which helps to provide education, material, and resources for that purpose, the abolitionist movement, both past and present. To be clear, I am not a prison abolitionist. I am a slavery abolitionist. I'm always making sure people understand that I am a slavery abolitionist. I believe that what we're dealing with is, in fact, a crime against humanity that has been perpetuated, particularly upon minorities, and that it cannot be reformed. It must be abolished, because if it is, as I say, a crime against humanity, then you can't fix that. You can't repair that. You can't reform that. That is something that you have to end completely. And I know a lot of people will say things like, if we end this thing, we have to replace it with another one. Well, I don't see it that way. If a crime against humanity is happening and it's hugely profitable, as it is, as Brother Ivan was explaining, with $1 trillion a year generated through these prison industries and all the surrounding satellite companies and the money spent by prisoners and their families. As far as replacing that, no, that's not what I'm interested in. I'd like to see those resources freed up where they can be used to rebuild the communities that have been destroyed, provide educations for people to be able to reach higher heights in our society, and to give back to those who have lost everything. I was born in Paterson, New Jersey. For those that are familiar with that old movie Lean on Me about Eastside High School, that was my environment. Grew up around the projects where I watched my community be destroyed by the Clinton administration's decisions to farm out their jobs to various countries for pennies on the dollar. So companies that were in my community, like Arrow, Stapler, and Wonder Bread, and the Silk City is what they called it. So they had a lot of dye factories. All of those things were sent over to Mexico or some other nation where they got it for pennies on the dollar. And my community was basically destroyed. And drugs came in, alcohol, depression, and with that, of course, crime. And then they opened up a new county jail there, the Passaic County Jail, and then just started filling it with my family members. If they weren't killed outright, they were either addicted to drugs without any resources or just incarcerated. They would come in our community like you would go into a Walmart shopping mall with a carriage, and whatever you needed, you grabbed. And that was how they treated our people. The property that we had owned and developed over generations became worthless, and we lost it all. And it used to be a predominantly Black community, and now you can't find but a few Black blocks in the whole city. Everybody was displaced. It's a horrible place. At one point, the projects that we were living near, the Alabama projects, had the highest AIDS rate in the country. That's how bad it was. We're like sardine cans that they put us in, these projects. And my family still exists in poverty there. During the process of coming up in that environment, I was exposed to a tragedy in the form of the death of Lawrence Myers back in 1995, I believe. 16-year-old boy that got shot in the back of the head by a white rookie cop while he was laying face down on the ground in broad daylight. And I knew the kid, I knew his parents and everything like that. And the country almost rioted over that. Many people did riot over that, particularly in our city. At the time, the mayor of the city was the first black mayor, Marty Barnes. So I was blown away. How could this possibly happen? What is going on here? And I've been born in a revolution, as the brother mentioned earlier. 1964 Civil War. The Civil Rights Movement. That was when I was born. So I was born during this whole process and grew up in it and saw it with my own eyes. And when they killed Lawrence Myers, I started asking questions, and I want to know, how could this be possible? So I work with the mayor, I work with the sheriff's department, I work with all the alleged leaders of the community to try to find some way that this would never happen again. Little did I know that they were the reason it was happening, because not long after that, both the mayor and the sheriff went to prison for corruption. The mayor was siphoning funds from the city for his own purposes. At one point, he went on a skiing trip with my wife and my sister and his mistress, all on the city's tabs. He was taking money from the new jail construction people in order to build that jail there in Patterson so that they could fill it with my family members. And the sheriff was working in conjunction with him to get that done, falsely arresting people, allowing drugs to be pervasive in our community rather than going after the sources of the drugs. They would focus on the dealers who were trying to survive in a place where you took all the jobs out, and it decimated us. So this caused me to keep asking questions, and I believe that you should judge a person by their questions and not their answers. So I was trying to ask some good questions, and as this process went on, the man who killed Lawrence Myers, the cop who killed him, was put off duty with pay. You know how they usually do it, and then he sued the state and got his back pay. And then he also got another job. He was promoted to head supervisor for a youth detention facility in the city where he killed a 16-year-old boy. Again, I'm like, how in the hell is this even possible that a man murders a child, and instead of going to prison for it, he gets huge amounts of back pay, a vacation, and then is promoted to be in charge of children? The answer to that for me came a few years later when I heard Angela Davis speak. And I know this is not her narrative now, but it was her narrative then. And she explained how the 13th Amendment allowed for slavery to continue. And she also made a call for a 21st century abolitionist movement. And in my mind, everything went click. That was the key moment for me, because I wasn't aware of the exception clause of the 13th Amendment. Like many other people in the United States, I simply took it for granted that it did what it said, that people said it did, that it ended slavery. It's only 47 words, and I had never bothered to even read it. So for those who haven't, don't feel bad. That's how most of us are. We just took for granted it said what it said. So when I heard Angela Davis say that, as I said, my mind, just a click happened and everything changed. All the puzzle pieces fit together now, and I understood the bigger picture. And that began my life as a slavery abolitionist. And we did our best to create the conditions that Angela Davis called for, a 21st century abolitionist movement. So around the time that the Free Alabama movement was coming together and these brothers were building prison work strikes, we were also hosting a radio show on Black Talk Radio Network called New Abolitionist Radio. And we were influencing these movements as well as projecting them to the outside world. So, the 13th Amendment became a topic amongst the brothers. Modern day slavery, crimes against humanity, human trafficking, where prisoners are shipped from one state to another in order to fill quotas. Like Arizona, for instance, is like a hub of human trafficking for the prison system. It's so bad that they even have a prison where at one time they only housed Hawaiians. So if you get arrested in Hawaii, they ship you like 3,000 miles away across the ocean to Arizona in a prison. And that's human trafficking. So we started talking about all of these things and breaking them down, and we were influencing each other. Free Alabama movement, the brothers on the inside with the strikes, they were playing their role, and on the outside, we were playing our role and trying to bring everything together. So in that one major strike that they put together, we worked with the I Am We Prison Advocacy Network. Krista Roundtree was the head of that, and we also worked with Jailhouse Lawyers Speak, Brother SJ, who doesn't want me to say his name, so pardon me, but jailhouse lawyers speak, and we organized on the outside to support that. So what we put together while the prison slave labor work strike was going on was marches in 17 different cities, while the core of the movement was in Washington, D.C. And we marched through D.C. We met there as slavery abolitionists, very likely the largest gathering of slavery abolitionists in U.S. history post-antebellum period. We gathered at the church down the street from Frederick Douglass's house. And the next day, we did a march and we did a rally right there in D.C., where I was one of the keynote speakers, along with Brother Robert King, who spent 30 some odd years in solitary confinement. Others were there, like Albert Woodfox. Mumia spoke at that event. We had a huge crowd there. It was amazing and historic, and also overlooked by mainstream media, as usual. So that was our way of supporting what the brothers were doing. While they were on the strike, we were on the outside bringing the noise to this and continuing to educate on the idea that what we're doing is dealing with a system that is a crime against humanity, and not a mistake, not an error of judgment over time, not bad ideas that we haven't fixed, not remnants of slavery or the legacy of slavery, but the actual continuation of legalized slavery. And we've showed factually how the only difference between the chattel slavery period and the slavery period that we have now is that the individual can no longer own human beings outright. The state took over that once the 13th Amendment exception clause was put into the Constitution. So as you all know, as academics and historians, we had this process called convict leasing that began before the 13th Amendment and continued long on after it. Brother Benu and Kinetic have even spoken of the current effects of that convict leasing system, which allegedly ended in 1928 or 1921, depending on which historians you ask. But we all know that it continued all the way up till now. There's stories of it in the 1960s and 70s. Here in South Carolina, we had women's prisons making Victoria's Secret underwear. Right now, you have over 4,100 companies that use prison slave labor or services for their industries. And we're not talking about, government industries. We're talking about companies that are sold throughout the markets and worldwide distribution, like McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's and Starbucks and Whole Foods and IBM and all of these different companies that exploit prison labor, including firefighters in California and other states who are working for like $2 a day to fight active fires where they can't even get a job as a firefighter after they get out, which is pretty amazing and sickening. So we were showing all of these connections through our media efforts and organizational efforts, which has led us up to today. Just a week ago, we've had some major victories. We managed to remove the exception clause from 2 states, which is Utah and Nebraska. That makes 3 states that we've removed the exception clause for slavery from those state constitutions. And for the first time in the history of those states, slavery is illegal. For the first time. Our overall goal is to get all 50 states on board and territories, including Puerto Rico, which has an exception clause in their state constitution, in their territory constitution, which is written in Spanish. So that's our goal, and then eventually get to the 13th Amendment, repeal and replace it and take that exception clause out. We know this loophole was created in order to exploit prison labor. But here in the 21st century, we have a very new phenomenon that's going on in the form of warehousing bodies. So they don't even need to work you anymore. Now they just put you in a cell, and if you're laying on a slab in solitary confinement, like Brother Benu or Brother Kinetic is doing, that is worth X amount of dollars to the prison through the Department of Justice's budget. And the more people you have in these prisons, the more money you're going to make. It's going to create jobs. It creates revenue for the counties and the cities, to the point where many states can say that their number one industry is prison, like here in South Carolina, where we employ over 7,000 people in the South Carolina prison industry. And it generates so much revenue that it's our number one industry. So these connections we've made over time with everybody. One of the things that Robert addressed earlier, he said about me, is that I showed the links of how this exception clause did not begin in 1865. It actually started in 1777 with Vermont. Vermont was the first state to include an exception clause, which is in its state constitution today, but they are also in the process of removing it as part of the abolitionist movement. But their state constitution said slavery shall be abolished in the state of Vermont, and I can't say verbatim, so I'm just going to give you the general idea, except for prisoners duly convicted and for the payment of debts or the like. So you could be a slave for debts and the like. And then that same exception clause from there, when they were using primarily European indentured servitude, advanced further on to the point where we saw it again pop up in 1787 in the Northwest Ordinance. Then it came again in 1806 in the Ohio State Constitution. Then in 1861, we saw, of course, Lincoln and his support for the Corwin Amendment, which, although it didn't have an exception clause, it would have enshrined slavery into the Constitution where it could never be abolished. And then we saw it come up again in 1861 in the Alabama State Constitution, Section 32, which is something we're working on right now. Amendment 4 just passed, giving us the opportunity to remove slavery or racist language. So we may be able to adjust that Section 32 now and remove the exception clause from there. And then finally, it showed up in 1865 within the 13th Amendment. Lincoln knew what it was all about. If you may have read his letters to Stevens, Justice Stevens, and one of them, I believe it was in 1859, where he sent him a letter saying, you have no fear of the North interrupting your system of slavery no more than you did with Washington. And that the only difference between the South and the North was that in the South, they thought that slavery was a right that should be available to all. And in the North, they thought that it should be restricted. And when Lincoln was talking about being restricted, he was talking about using convict leasing, which was basically a streamlined way of the state applying slavery. And it was also much more cruel. Many historians believe that this period was worse than slavery because during the times of chattel slavery, there was some concern about the health and welfare of the people that you allegedly own because you wanted them to live as long as possible so you can get more labor out of them. But during the convict leasing period, as suggested in the book One Dies, Get Another by Jay Mancini, that if you were a part of that system, they would literally work you to death with no concern at all. One dies, get another. So whenever they had projects with the mines or the railroads or on the plantations, they would simply go out and apply these Jim Crow laws that we were just talking about in order to pick up as many workers as they could possibly need or get, women, men, and children. And if you remember, the reason they said Alabama was the last state to abolish convict leasing is because of that cave-in that occurred. I think it was 1928, where something like 140 or 150 men, women, and children were killed, predominantly all Black men, women, and children in a cave-in. And it outraged the entire world to think here we are like 90-something years after slavery, and we're still doing the same damn thing and worse to people of color. So allegedly, that was the time when they abolished it. But we all know that they didn't truly abolish it any more than they abolished slavery. As Frederick Douglass had warned us, slavery will keep giving itself new names. And the new names that we have now are things called mass incarceration, which I believe is a misnomer. I don't think there is such a thing as mass incarceration. I think if you had went back in time in 1850 and you told Harriet Tubman, we got to solve this problem of mass incarceration, she might have shot you because they knew what they were dealing with then. And that's a problem that we have today is we really don't have a clue of what we're dealing with. There's a number of different narratives all vying for control of what it is that we're dealing with. So you have people who are calling themselves criminal justice reformists who believe that this is a mistake and you can fix it. Then you have people who are prison abolitionists who want to focus on abolishing sections of it. They don't view this as a crime against humanity any more than the reformists do. And then you have the other side, prison slavery abolitionists and slavery abolitionists who agree that this is a crime against humanity. And, that's what I want from you guys as academics. I need help in that arena is to get our narrative right, especially from you. If you make the decision based on the facts that you'll be reviewing from hearing me and looking deeper that this is indeed the continuation of slavery, legalized and codified through the 13th Amendment, in practice and law all across America, post 13th Amendment. And you agree that this is a crime against humanity, that hopefully you'll start changing your narrative and start using these terms, slavery and human trafficking, rather than these vague and ambiguous terms that we use that imply things like saying it's a caste system, or saying it's mass incarceration, or saying that it's a system of racism and white supremacy or injustices in the court. Those are all symptoms of slavery. They're not the core issue. They're symptoms of the core issue. So when you start changing your mind about that and start looking at it as a crime against humanity, you also have to change your strategy and your narrative. And that's what we need. We need you guys to get on the same page with us. We're charging slavery, human trafficking, and genocide. For example, right now, there are 120,000 people estimated who are wrongfully convicted, and everybody knows it. 120,000 people. We went to war for less than that. We also know that as much as 70% of our prison population are not there because they're rapists and murderers and pedophiles, but primarily because of drug-related, poverty-related, mental health-related conditions. As much as 70% of the prison population who shouldn't be in a prison, they should be receiving help. And we know that the priorities is not about helping the community. And we can see that in examples of how much it costs to incarcerate a person. I use this example often because it's a well-known one, but Khalif Browder went to Rikers Island for 3 years. He was incarcerated 3 years, which is a Sixth Amendment violation, right? It's supposed to be only a year, but 3 years, where he was incarcerated in Rikers Island at 16 years old. And the cost to incarcerate him was $350,000 a year. $350 freaking thousand a year. That is a bounty on our children's head. That is not about crime and punishment. How the hell can you lock a person up for 3 years without ever charging them of anything? A 16-year-old child in an adult freaking prison, which is known as a hell on earth, and charge a taxpayer $350,000 a year to do it. If you had given his mother at least a portion of that, which you would pay to incarcerate him for a year, you would have never seen Khalif Browder anywhere near a court system. And we see this all across America, where these costs of incarcerations are sky high. It's like $80,000 for adults in California. It's like $100,000 in Rhode Island. All across America, this is the cost of incarceration. And in Alabama right now, they're about to build 2 new prisons. Now, why do they want to build 2 new prisons at the cost of like $1 billion? It's because Alabama has been up to as much as 300% occupancy in their prisons, which is a freaking crime against humanity in itself, where you have people stacked like cordwood.